Hello learners, welcome back to the course Ecological Economics of the program Postgraduate Diploma in Sustainability Science. Today's brought up topic is on economic thoughts and ecology. When we are going to look into the history of human civilization in general and how humans are understanding where we are going, we'll find out that the recognition by humans of our own impact upon the earth that is consistently led behind the magnitude of the damage what we have imposed. So thus, seriously weakening efforts to control this damage. Even today, technological optimists ignore the mounting evidence of all this global environmental degradation until it intrudes more inescapable upon our human welfare. So the growth optimist scholars most of the time often draw comfort from the few of the arguments on that, like gross domestic product, as we call as GDP. I know what they are saying, that GDP figures are increasing throughout much of the world. Life expectancies are increasing in many nations. Evidence of greenhouse warming is very ambiguous. Some claims of the environmental damage have been exaggerated. Previous predictions of environmental catastrophe have not been borne out. So of all these, each of all these statements in one sense are correct. However, not one of them is a reason for complacency, and indeed, taken together, they should be viewed as powerful evidence of the need for an innovative approach to environmental analysis and management. So, GDP and other current measures of national income accounting are notorious for overweighting market transaction, understating resource depletion, omitting pollution damage, and failing to measure real change in human well-being. Right. So, in this line, ecological economics is essentially a rethinking of this fundamental relationship and working out of the implication of a new way of thinking for how we manage our life and our planet. In fact, ecological economics is a branch of economic theory, which we also known as human development theory or natural welfare economics, that assumes an inherent link between the health of ecosystems and that of human beings. Commonly, we refer this also as green economics. The primary argument of this ecological economic is that economic is itself a structural field of ecology, in that ecology deals with the inertia and the matter transaction of life and the earth, and the human economy is by definition contained within this system. Some of the critics of current normative economics by ecological economics is its approach to natural resources and capital. Analysis from the standpoint of conventional and environmental economics, they undervalue natural capital in that it is treated as a factor of production interchangeable with labor and technology, means human capital. It is claimed that human capital is complementary to natural capital rather than interchangeable, as human capital inevitably derives from natural capital in one form or another. It rejects the view of energy economics that growth in the energy supply, which is related directly to well-being, focusing instead of biodiversity, creativity, or natural capital and individual capital in the terminology sometimes adopted to describe this economically. In practice, ecological economics focuses primarily on the key issues of uneconomic growth and measuring well-being. So, ecological economists are inclined to acknowledge that much of what is important in a human well-being is not analyzable from a strictly economic standpoint and suggests interdisciplinary approach with social and natural sciences as a means to address this. After this session, we will be able to underline the historical narrative, how world views on ecology, economics, and well-being have evolved, and we'll be able to explain various ideas and models in ecological economic discourse in their proper historical context. So in this evolution of economic thoughts and relationship with ecology, we are going to look into arguments of hypothesis, principle proposed by some of the well-known economists like Smith, Thomas Malthus, David Ricardo, John Stuart Mill, and Karl Marx. How this evolution of economic thoughts and relationship with ecology evolved, if you look at the historical context, we will find out that the period of classical economics, it began sometime during the second half of the 18th century. As I told you that some of the famous economists of the time include Smith, Thomas Malthus, David Ricardo, John Stuart Mill, and Karl Marx. They were pioneers in this field. If you look into that Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, it's a classical book on economics. One of the central ideas of this book was the division of labor. The workers perform the same tasks over and over. Upon doing this, they become better and their job and their productivity increases. That's what Adam Smith believed, that self-interest was the factor that filled the economy while competition was the regulator. He also argued that it is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest. Basically, if we look that the farmer doesn't maximize his growing season because people need to eat. He does it for his own economic survival and advancement. So that is what Smith viewed competitive market as a safety net of capitalism. One seller could not charge more because customer would patronize a different store. Basically, the farmer doesn't maximize his growing season because people need to eat. He does it for his own economic survival and advancement. So that is what Smith viewed competitive market is the safety net of capitalism. One seller could not charge more because customers would patronize a different store. So competitive markets assume that consumer is well informed. They assume that consumer knows of the different places that the product is available and knows of the different prices for identical item. In some cases, this is exactly true, but a lot of time the consumer is uninformed, especially when we look into today's world. Another that laissez-faire is another central idea to the classical period of economy. What is laissez-faire? It is an economic system in which transactions between private groups of people are free or almost free from any form of economic interventionism, such as regulation, subsidies. So for Smith, laissez-faire and minimal government intervention went hand in hand. He believed that if the market, both the international market as well as domestic market, was left alone, it would produce the greatest good. His argument again is that free and unimpeded trade would open new markets, giving small business owners cheaper labor and capital. So Smith had exceptions to this laissez-faire rule, such as for protecting infant industries or for when free trade conflicts with national defense. Adam Smith also introduced theory of value. According to him, there are two types of value can be looked. One is value in use, another is value in exchange. When we talk about value in use, it refers to how useful an item. In case of value in exchange, it is the price of that good relative to every other good. So he's mainly focused on total utility rather than marginal utility. So he stressed labor is the source of value, Most obviously, in his idea of a division of labor and the way it increases production, he encountered a problem with circular reasoning when he attempted to formulate a labor cost theory of value. So the economic growth at a macro level, according to Adam Smith, is dependent on the distribution of income, then divided into three classes. One is capitalist, second laborers, and third is landlords. The more money the capitalist had for profit, the more the economy would grow. He theorized that what he believed to be an economic circle of life, the circle started with a division of labor, which would lead to increase in productivity. So, an increase in productivity that would cause wages to increase, leading to a higher average income as well as higher levels of consumption. This is what Smith believed to cause the wealth of a nation and increase in per capita income. So, the final step before the circle would be completed is an increase in capital accumulation, which should be a result of the increase in the nation's wealth, but only if the capitalism had this point. The only way to save and reinvest the surplus was to keep it in the hands of the capitalist. So this is one of the narrow-minded views that state constituted throughout much of the classical period of economics. So in painting the picture of capitalist versus the landlord, then another ecologist, Ricardo, changes the landscape of economics and politics, especially in England. For Ricardo, there were three classes: the good-doing capitalists who earn profit, the invisible laborers who earn a wage, and the evil landlords who did nothing and collected the rent. The first theory that arises from his class picture is Ricardo's theory of rent. However, Ricardo is most famous for his theory of comparative advantage, which is an international economic theory in which two countries can trade with each other but benefit. For example, let us take an example of Nation 1 and Nation 2. Nation 1 has a comparative advantage over Nation 2. So, Nation 1 can produce more beer and burlap than Nation 2. However, Nation 1 is a lot more efficient in brewing beer than they are at making burlap. Nation 2, on the other hand, is the most efficient at making burlap. Therefore, Nation 1 would want to specialize in brewing beer and Nation 2 would want to specialize in making burlap. As the nation specializes, their opportunity cost will increase. Eventually, two countries will equalize their respective opportunity costs, allowing to trade outside their production possibilities frontier. So the theory of comparative advantage has practical applications. During the late 1700s, England had imposed the Corn Laws, which kept the price of food artificially high because of severe restriction on imported grain. As the price of the food increased, the subsistence level followed. Capitalists were forced to pay the subsistence level to workers. The workers had to be alert and healthy for work. So it certainly was not the fault of the laborers that they require food. Thus, Ricardo blamed that the landlord, and for good reason, as England's government at the time was landowning class system. Combining that Ricardo's theory of rents and the rising cost of food made for a glum outlook for the capitalists, it was not until that Ricardo proved his theory of comparative advantage theory that government would allow imported grain in. So David Ricardo, his belief is that a theory of value was important in explaining the economic forces that cause changes in relative prices over time. So his theory held to the idea that value depends upon the quantity of labor needed to produce the good, not the wages paid. Although this doesn't take into account the various skill levels of laborers, Ricardo was trying to explain the changes in relative pressures over time rather than at a certain point in time. In the time, Ricardo felt that value in use is necessary for the existence of exchange, means existence of exchange value. However, it was not a accurate measure. In other words, how can you say that? In other words, he knew there needed to be at least some demand for a product before he enters the market, though he did not believe that demand was a good indicator of the product's market price. The another economist is, we know, Thomas Malthus, which is best known for his population doctrine. His population doctrine carries two assumptions. First, that food is necessary to the existence of man. Second, that the patient between sexes is necessary will remain nearly in its present state. So, in other words, the doctrine of the population doctrine of Malthus states that the population will grow at much faster rather than food supply. Malthus either failed to recognize or failed to include the idea of technology stabilizing the birth rate. That time, John Stuart Mill advocated more on equal income distribution. His greatest discovery consisted in pointing out that true province of economic law was production and not the distribution. The other major contribution of Mill is his emphasis on the linkages between human behavior and common good that recognize the rule of property use and sense of social responsibility. He was perhaps the first economist to argue in favor of not converting all the natural capital into man-made capital and envision economies becoming mature, reaching a state where people would enjoy the fruits of their earlier income, which is called steady state. Mill found flaws in capitalism that none of the other famous economists never mentioned. He believed that he can fix this problem through legislation, social interventions. So no one stands out during this classical period of economics than Karl Marx, the critics of the classical period. He is also a best known critic of capitalism. Karl Marx, with a proper sense of finance and the left-wing radical personality, was the complete opposite of David Ricardo. The belief of Karl Marx is that capitalism creates a kind of alienation and exploitation of the labor force. Profit could only be had through exploiting the workers. For him, it was the big bad capitalist versus the meek and the poor laborer, the bourgeois versus the proletariat. Marx believed that there were only three ways to increase surplus value or profit. So the capitalist could increase the length of the workday, increase the intensity of the work output, or reduce the wage bill. So all three are detrimental to the worker and helpful in growing the profit, just as stock prices seem to go up at the news of layoffs, so did company value back then. Marx also believed that capitalism leads to the alienation of labor class. First, workers become alienated from the goods they produce. They are alienated from the process that builds essence. Here, Marx used to describe essence as individuals' aura or character. Secondly, workers are alienated by losing control over the product they produce. The laborers don't feel that they have any ownership. All they have is their labor. This leads to a lack of pride in one's work and certainly a decline in the overall quality of the goods. Thirdly, the surplus flow, that value, does not go to the worker. Instead, it goes to the capitalist. Finally, the labor force of the worker becomes the property of the owner. So, the Marx drew his theory of value directly from Ricardo. Though he did include in his own new insight, Marx argued that the total sum of all labor was grouped into what he called as abstract labor. Furthermore, the relative ratios are a reflection of the total number of abstract labor hours required to produce a good. multiplied by the varying wage rates. This helped to explain the problem of labor with varying skill levels. Marx also divides labor value into two categories. One is direct labor, another is indirect labor. When we talk about a direct labor, it was the worker that actually producing a good. The indirect labor is the number of hours that someone spent creating the tools used to produce another good. So Marx theorized that the laborer who normally work a 10 or 12 hours a day would only receive a wage for 6 or 7 hours. The remainder was what the capitalists call profit, right? Marx called it a surplus value, the difference between the market price of a good and the production cost associated with creating that good. For Marx, the value of a commodity went far beyond its market price. Marx believed that the value of a good went far beyond the market price or the rate at which that good could be exchanged for another. So Marx's argument is that a commodity has a value because it is a crystallization of social labor, and that the relative values of commodities are therefore determined by the respective quantities or amounts of labor, work of, realized, fixed in them. Here again, he also believed that the value of a good was separate and distinct from the prices that good could fetch in the market. This value was a detached concept, abstract in nature, and not subject to the fluctuation in relative price. So, in that line, another economist, W. Stanley Jones, is known for his seminal work on marginal theory of value. He is probably for the first time who has recognized the critical importance of energy for economic growth. So, in his time, energy is in that time when we talk about energy, that's mean coal, a dwindling natural resource as we know that. He highlighted the critical role that coal energy play in British economy and implication of its scarcity. So the classical period of economics had some great ideas and concepts. So Ricardo discovered comparative advantage, Marx introduced abstract labor, and Smith stated the advantage of division of labor. So the classical period also had some awful ones. The Malthusian population doctrine may have been important during his period, but certainly is not much important nowadays. Nor is the idea that capitalist class is the only class that serves. So the laws of the classical economics are such that they favor quick economic growth through profit investment. If it is it was not profit in the hands of capitalists, it was spent. So this is why all science during this period pointed out that the rate of profit would fall over time and that the age of capitalism would eventually be reached. So 150 years later, we still have yet to see this through classical economics still sticking around. In subsequent years, the theoretical development economists like market failure by A.C. Vigo and in temporal aspect of resource use efficiency of Harold Hotlings, they also contributed to the evolution of discourses in ecological economics, which we'll discuss later on. Similarly, the theoretical evolution in other disciplines have also contributed and influenced discourse concerning the relationship between nature and economy. Some of the notable that works include, Darwin's theory of evolution. Ernst Haeckel works on conceptual issues of ecology. Then the thermodynamic analysis by Alfred J. Lotka that integrated that ecological and economic system, and so on. So by the late 1970s, one economist, Julian Simon, began countering arguments against economic growth. His keystone work was on the ultimate resource, which was published in 1981 and updated in 1996 as the ultimate resource 2, in which he concluded that there is no reason why welfare should not continue to improve and that increase in population contribute to that improvement in the long run. So his theory was that population growth and increased income input pressure on resource supplies. So this increases prices, which provides both opportunity and incentives for innovation. Eventually, the innovation are so successful that prices end up below what they were before resource shortages occur. So, in Simon's view, a key factor in economic growth is the human capacity for creating new ideas and contributing to the knowledge. Therefore, the more people who can be trained to help solve a rising problem, the faster obstacles are removed and the greater the economic condition for current and future generation. So, environmental economics takes into consideration issues such as the conservation and valuation of natural resources, pollution control, waste management and recycling, and efficient creation of emission standard. So, economic, is an important tool for making decisions about use, conservation and protection of natural resources, because we know that it provides information about the choices of people make, the cost and benefit of various proposed measures, and the likely outcome of environmental and other policies. Since you know that resources, whether human, natural or monetary, are not infinite, here public policies are most effective when they achieve the maximum possible benefit in the most efficient way. Therefore, one important key job of policymaker is to understand how resources can be utilized more efficiently in order to accomplish the desired goals by weighing the cost of various alternatives to their potential benefits. So, in competitive markets, information exists about how much consumers value a particular goods, because we know how much they are willing to pay. So, when natural resources are involved in the production of that particular good, there may be other factors, scarcity issues, the generation of pollution, that we never include that in its production cost. So, if these full costs are included, the cost of the good may be higher than the value placed on it by the consumer. So, a classical example of an externality can be discussed from the point of in Garnet Hardin's tragedy of the commons. In that, now in tragedy of commons, what happened that is directly occurs in connection to public commons or resources areas that are open accessible to all, such as the seas or the atmosphere, right? Hardin observed that individuals will use the common more if they need to pay to use them, leading to overuse and the possibility to increase degradation. So, there are three general school of thoughts associated with reducing or eliminating environmental externalities. Most welfare economists believe that the existence of externalities is sufficient justification for government intervention, typically involving taxes, often referred to as Figovian taxes after economist Alter Figo, who developed the concept of economic externality. You see here in this figure, economic view of the environment, which is presented in this figure. You will see that here, measuring society's well-being is the topmost, and the last is government response to market failure. Here, you will see market economists tend to advocate the use of incentive to reduce environmental externalities rather than command and control approaches, because incentives allows flexibilities in responding to problems rather than forcing a singular approach on all individuals. So, free market economies focus on eliminating obstacles that prevent a market from functioning freely, which they believe would lead to an optimal level of environmental protection resources. So, the key objective of environmental economics is to identify those particular tools or policy alternatives that will move the market toward a most efficient allocation of resources, right? So, if I summarize what we discussed in today's session is that we have discussed on the evolution of economic thoughts through the contribution of economists like Adam Smith, Malthus, Ricardo, etc., providing a strong foundation for understanding the relationship between economics and ecology. Thank you very much. See you in another session.